First thing, does the word phenylketonuria mean anything to you?
G'day, everyone. This is the Bed Hair Podcast, a special episode. I'm here joined by my grandmother. We too have read the book Flowers for Algernon, and we'll be discussing it. The first part here is we're gonna try and keep it spoiler free. We'll talk about the author and the context around the book, some basic overview of what the book's about, and ultimate and most importantly, who should read the book. And then after that point, we'll start diving into the specifics of the book, of our likes and like nots, and yeah, from that we'll just start with Mim talking about the author and the time that it was written in.
First thing, does the word phenylketonuria mean anything to you?
It does not. What does that mean?
Well, I have encountered it for years because I've always tried to use sugar substitutes
Mm-hmm.
instead of sugar because it's not good for you.
Mm-hmm.
But on the on many of the sugar substitutes is a warning that people with phenylketonuria shouldn't be using them. I've
Interesting.
never known
And you haven't known
I've
what
never
this
known
issue
what
is.
it is.
Mm.
I've never looked it up.
Okay.
Um, and I've always been intrigued.
That is a very
And I discovered it when I read Flowers for Algernon and
oh.
did a tiny bit of research about it,
Okay.
because indeed that's what um, what our protagonist has got. That's what caused him, that phenylketonuria, to have an IQ of 70.
Interesting. I had no idea. That is very fascinating. Well,
So
they need to
this book,
why did they make such an ailment so difficult to remember the name of? If it's people that suffer with it struggle with memory is another question,
that's a,
but
that's a really good question. But then I went to see when this book was published, and that was 1966. And the thing is that in 1966, I can remember the 60s,
mm-hmm.
it probably hadn't been discovered as a cause of um, brain bad brain function or development in in the fetus before they're born.
Mm,
So, or after they're born,
mm,
but the state of phenylketonuria has caused um, Charlie
mm-hmm.
to have this low IQ.
Mm,
The other thing I wanted to say is that in 1966, because the book was written then, it was the dark ages in a way of psychology and neurology and so on.
mm-hmm.
Even though these people, so full of confidence, were breaking new ground in their um, discoveries of of psychological problems and blah blah. But I was thinking it was exactly 1966. I was studying psychology
Wow.
at Adelaide Uni, and we had sessions, quite lots and lots of sessions with Skinner boxes, they were called,
Yeah, wow.
and we all had a rat.
Wow.
And I've got to say, I'm not proud of this, that in the Skinner box was our rat, and we were all allocated a rat. Um, there was a bar for the rat to push for food,
Yep.
to get rewarded with food. And appalled to have to tell you that my rat, because of my inconsistency,
Uh-huh.
would not cooperate with me at all, but it would just run round the cage and do wheeze. And I just concluded that it was because of this appalling training, because other people's rats were doing what they wanted, like press the bar 2 times and you get 2 bits of food.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, there was a really dramatic. So we had these great heavy boxes and all sat at desks. I didn't really know why I was there or what it was about,
Okay.
but we'd do this every week or however often. The rats that died used to go to I don't know if it was med school or somewhere else to be dissected
Yeah.
by students too, which is pretty grim.
Yeah.
My rat didn't die, just got very intellectually distressed by
Damn.
my lack of ability to reward it at the right time. So it really was I suppose, a bit of the beginning of this training, uh, training animals and
Mm-hmm.
investigating animals to see how the brain actually worked.
Yeah.
Well, I found that mine didn't, and nor did my rats.
Hey, it's not your fault. You were delegated the Charlie Gordon of rats when
I
it
know.
comes to the Skinner box. Don't
I
hold that on
always,
yourself.
I always used to slink away. Our tutor was called Leon Lack, and he was a very patient man and a good tutor. And in fact, I heard of him doing some very good work um, about 30 years later. He was American, but I just the whole thing was difficult.
Mm.
So it was just uh, so weird to be reading this book,
Yeah,
reading
that
this book, because
I
I'd
I had no
complete.
idea the relevance of this book for you when
Ah,
it came to that recommendation. That's incredible. I also had no idea that you were doing the Skinner box experiments when the Skinner box experiments were being discovered. That's insane to me.
well, that that's you know, uh, there was a thing that happened in that class that was so distressing to me that I didn't go back for a few times. But the Skinner boxes had all these power leads and power. They were all over the floor.
Mm-hmm.
There were um, leads and black. Uh, they were black leads. I remember that, and there was hardly anywhere to walk. But um, I during one tutorial, someone near me had an epileptic fit,
Oh wow.
and it was so shocking. He was getting tangled up in the leads. The Skinner boxes were in threat of falling on him because he was tangled up in the leads. And it was incredibly shocking. And I hadn't heard of epilepsy either.
Wow.
So um, the tutor was able to keep him from harming himself,
Yeah.
because often people with epilepsy will
Yep.
bite their tongue or whatever. And he was able to restore him. But I think it was the helplessness and the shock of it that just my mind was frozen, and most people didn't know how to help.
Yeah.
But we were very lucky that the tutor was there. But that's and I think, but anyway, I did in the end. I did in the end pass. 1 year of
That's
psychology just because of reading, I think.
that's good. You're making up for the bad hand in
Yeah.
Algernon's younger brother that you were dealt.
Oh
Give me
my gosh. Yeah.
give me yeah a very basic overview of the plot and setting. It's set now modern day. It's about a young boy. I honestly think that the blurb gives away too much of this book. Would you agree? Do you remember the blurb?
I don't. I need to be reminded
That's
because
okay.
I was reading, I was listening to Audible.
Yeah. Oh yeah, so you wouldn't you wouldn't have even. So
Yeah.
did you read
So,
the book without reading the blurb?
yeah, I think when it first came into the house, I read the blurb,
Yeah. Okay.
but it just
You've
didn't stay in my
yeah.
mind. It
Yeah.
didn't
Because you weren't reading
interfere
it
with
straight
any of
away.
my thinking. Yeah.
That's fair enough. The blurb, I would say. So we're still in spoiler free, so I won't actually say what the blurb is. But I
Yeah.
think going into the book a bit more blind than I did might be nice because the blurb sort of gives you plot points up until 2/3 of the book, which I think
Yeah.
might just be a bit much. I feel like generally with a blurb, I'm looking for like just the hook that gets me into the book rather
Yeah.
than up until the climax what happens, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that was my thoughts there. So I guess my replacement blurb would probably be something like honestly just all of the blurb except the final lines. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, about Charlie Gordon, a floor sweeper born with an unusually low IQ, has been chosen as the perfect subject for an experimental surgery that doctors hope will increase his intelligence. All
Yeah.
Charlie wants is to be smart and have friends, but yeah, I'm not gonna say that next part. Um, so that's something. I mean, it's not. It's an incomplete description of the book, but I just think that a lot the blurb gives away a decent chunk, and I think one of the coolest things about this book is how gradual the change of his character occurs. It's like a true boiling of the frog, boiling and cooling of the frog. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. That's a good image.
So I think the blurb just giving you basically just giving you what he is at the start, what he is a third into the book, and then what he is 2/3 into the book, and then leaving the cliffhanger to be just the final third. I think you can just cut
Yeah.
it. Just give us like the
Yeah.
initial sell, and then let the readers enjoy it. So that's what I'd recommend for those at home considering this book. Uh, Regarding other notes, spoiler-free notes that I've got questions down here, I have written basic overview of key characters, and then overview of themes, all spoiler-free, and then finally who should read this book, and possibly reviews. Maybe we'll save an out of 10 review for the very end, but I think an out of 10 review out of context isn't even that helpful. I think a better question is who should read the book without getting into spoilers, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, easy. So,
Yes.
Mim, who are some of the key characters at the start of this book, and what do you feel like they represent?
I think um, the thing that hooked me in and kept me reading was how cleverly this man managed to give us all sorts of information through the lens that Charlie was seeing through, which
Mm.
was his mental age.
Mm.
Um, I, of course, he was uh, important as the book unfolds. Uh, I don't want to tell you too
Yeah,
much.
yeah, yeah. No.
In the early stages,
Yeah.
Alice is very important.
Yeah.
Um, Later stages, uh,
Well, we don't have to talk about later
the
stages for now.
mm,
Um,
do you want? It's
I'm.
hard.
That's fair. That's fair. That's fair. I'm just. I guess I'm trying to structure it in a sense where a viewer could watch the first part and then we say, okay, we're about to do spoilers, and then they can stop watching and then choose to read the book. Or if they choose not to read the book, or if they've already read the book, then they listen on.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Look, I could confidently say I was absolutely um, blown away how well this uh, author was able to capture
Mm.
the age of this 32-year-old
Yeah,
man, the
yeah,
mental age.
yeah,
There's the I really wanted to listen to his account
yeah,
of what was happening,
yeah.
and it gets you straight into that. Um, I wanted to hear everything from his point of view,
Mm.
and that put me kind of traveling a journey with
Mm.
this child,
Yeah,
well, with this man child,
yeah.
and I found it compelling. Instead of the author being more narrative and saying, well, there was this kid who was affected like this, and there were these people, and it was compelling to see it right from the start through his eyes
Yeah,
and his interpretation, his responses, his fears, his hopes, his friendships. I thought it was
mm.
extraordinarily clever. Sometimes you get a book where you've got action and then you have the narrator sort of commenting on it, or
Mm-hmm.
even talking about what was going to happen next or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But here you are actually in the room with um, this man
Yeah,
giving an account of his experience. It was compelling.
yeah, yeah.
I couldn't put it down.
I would totally echo that sentiment. I think one of the biggest strengths, I mean, one of the biggest strengths of books in general are that you get a glimpse into what another person's thinking and into another person's perspective. And arguably books do this better than other mediums. But then this book, it's, I mean, it takes that to the fight, like the reasonable conclusion of how personal, how first person can we get with this perspective. And
Mm.
it is just his diary, it is just his notes, as if he was just a real person writing said notes. um so I agree with the with that initial hook of it's not a book that I've seen. It's not a writing style that I've ever seen before, which is really compelling.
Um, the powerful thing too is that you get to have a very clear view of the people he encounters.
Mm.
Because the thing about him telling is that he doesn't tell lies. He
Mm-hmm.
hasn't learned about telling lies.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't understand them.
Yeah.
They're confusing to him. Um, so his responses are very candid
Mm.
and um, true somehow. But it tells you such a lot. There's so much information
Yeah.
in that simple narrative, in his simple diary journal, about what other people are like, not just what they do, but what they're like.
Mm.
And I got very uh, uh, alarmed by the vanity of Professor Nima,
for
example.
Yeah.
His vanity keeps shining through. You know, it's about his about what he's prepared to do and expose someone to, in order to prove to himself and to the world and become famous.
Yeah.
His theories.
Yeah.
But all that you find out through the diary, the
Yeah.
journal, Charlie's journal.
Yeah. The
And he,
what were you gonna say?
well, uh, very much later in the book,
Do you want to
that
hold?
man is,
Do you want to?
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sorry. I'm sorry. Sorry. I'm
yeah.
just. We'll try
Hold
and
me back.
we'll try and hold it. We'll try and hold it for there.
Yeah, go on.
I was gonna say on that note, it is so fascinating seeing the world through the mind of such candor and sincerity, and
Yeah,
also of literal, such a literal mind. Like, he doesn't see lies, but he also doesn't see analogies or metaphors
yeah.
or like meaning other than what's there, what's physical.
Wizzy,
Like, his
yeah,
his interaction with the Rorschach test was fascinating
yeah,
to me. That was
yeah,
what made me think, wow, that is, I actually couldn't have imagined what it would be like to have that sort of reaction to such an event. Um,
yeah.
so that was really fascinating. Okay, we'll wrap up the spoiler-free zone with I think a very important question, and this is a hard question to answer. This is, who should read this book? And in an ideal world, we make it as specific as possible. You know what I mean? Um,
Mm.
rather than ascribing every type of reader to this book, we'll try and hone in on the people that are most fascinated by it. And I mean, spoiler alert, both of our reviews are of the positive. So we would recommend it to people, and here we'll try and define specifically who we think would get the most out of this book. Do you want me to start, Mim, or do you want to start?
Yes, I will. I'd like you to start.
Oh, okay, okay. Uh, 1 second. I think I wrote some notes about this. So, oh, well, there are two things. We also have a summary of, quote unquote, what is this book about, and who should read this book. We could start with what is this book about and build that together, and then cast recommendations for who should read the book. Or should we? I'm hesitant to talk about what this book is about, because once you do ascribe larger themes and ideas of it, I think it might color the lens of the viewer. What do you think?
Um, Look, can we talk about themes broadly? Because
Yeah,
it's. I think there are many themes that apply to many different ages and stages of
yeah,
people.
yeah. Okay.
Things like, yeah, um,
Yeah, let's touch on a couple broad themes. I think talking about broad themes is not nearly as as spoilering as the blurb is.
mm,
So I
okay,
think that's okay. So we'll talk
yeah,
about that for a bit, like, without specifics. Do you have one or two that come forefront to mind?
yeah. It's about ignorance, intelligence, and intelligence not necessarily equaling happiness.
Maybe even the
Um,
difference between IQ and EQ.
yeah, I have that in my
Oh, okay.
notes.
Sorry, I'm jumping ahead.
That's good. That's good. I'm glad to hear we agree. The difference between intelligence and wisdom,
Mm,
activating just your brain on intelligence isn't enough. It's got to have heart.
mm,
And there are things about uh, cruelty and
mm-hmm,
bullying in
mm-hmm.
this book, which is in a more broad sense is about power differentials.
Yeah,
And I'm not talking about physical cruelty or
yeah.
physical bullying, but
As
but
as physical bullying and physical cruelty is much less frequent, at least in the place that we live, than
yeah,
than
yeah,
uh, emotional and interpersonal bullying. I mean, physical. Sorry, interpersonal
yeah,
power dynamics. Carry on.
yeah. Um, it's funny when uh, you think of what hooks you into the book. You think about what is touching about it and um, what is distressing. But there's a lot about wanting to belong
Mm,
in this book,
mm,
and that's seriously universal.
mm.
Whatever group you want to belong with, there's that need to connect and belong.
Yeah.
Is this general enough?
Yeah, no, that's general. That's good.
Yeah. What happens uh, when intelligence and emotional maturity don't develop in a parallel way gets very complex.
Mm,
Life gets very complex.
yeah. Yeah. That's I mean
Um,
that's a good deal of them. Did you have more?
um, One of the biggest themes, I suppose, is the very human thing of isolation,
Mm,
how hard that is to navigate in this world when we've kind of been built for connection.
yeah, without a doubt.
Mm.
Awesome. Yep, you hit on some I mean, honestly probably most of mine as well, but the only others that I have written here
Yeah,
are it's a book about existential dread and growing up and the
that's,
existential dread of that experience.
yeah,
Um, it's about desperation and treating your inner self with compassion rather than contempt.
yes, yeah,
An inner self that is invisible but is without a doubt still there.
yes.
And yeah, it
Such a good point.
those were
Treating the inner self with compassion.
mm. Is contempt the right word? What does contempt mean?
Contempt, scorn.
Scorn. Yeah, okay, that still works.
Mm.
Okay, and then finally, who do you think should read this book?
Um,
Who would,
Look,
or maybe rather than who should read this book, who would get the, what kind of person would get the most out of this book? Is that a better question?
yeah, it's a good question. Well, a couple of things about the book. 2 years after it was published, they made a film of it.
Mm,
So it obviously had taken flight, that people were reading it and fascinated. but also it was introduced to some schools, but some American states banned it
Interesting.
because they said it was too descriptive.
Really? What?
That they had to put an age limit on it. So I can't. I won't go into detail
Oh, wait. Was it?
because
Is it?
it's part of the future.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Um, so my feeling is that everyone should read it, but they shouldn't. But they're
No.
not going to.
Yeah.
It is an education to know how how dark the Dark Ages were, even as recently as 1966,
Mm.
in knowledge and understanding of psychological complexity.
Mm.
And many people were condemned to very terrible lives
Yeah.
because the understanding was not there.
And and then to
And
think. Oh, sorry. Carry on.
oh, I
I
just
have
think,
something on top of that, but I want you to finish your sentiment first.
yeah, I uh, think about a lot of detail in that book, which uh, nowadays we can see the causes
Mm-hmm.
of a lot of distress.
Mm.
But in those days, it just wasn't obvious or
Mm.
researched well enough, or the understanding wasn't there.
Yeah. And my question on that idea is, how do we know? I mean, we are likely currently in the dark ages of the 2090s, right? Of like they actually thought that this and this was the way the brain worked, and that this was the way to like best deal with people that struggled with this idea, with this issue. Like we're always going to be
Yeah,
in the dark ages, and if we put ourselves into the view of back then, maybe it'll help us glean the fact that there's always more new information that we don't currently yet know. Um,
I think that's a fantastic thing that you've said. That it in that short, well, it's a relatively short time, 50 years, isn't it?
yeah,
Um, yeah, that there was so little known,
mm,
but so many decisions were made based in on
yeah,
such small knowledge.
on just mice.
But yeah, but this but these days that's true too.
Mm, yeah. Um, no, that's. I mean, it's an very interesting perspective to tackle the book with. I've got, and while I do agree that it might be okay to say everyone should read this book, I feel like there are so many books everyone should read, and there are so many books that I should read that I'm never gonna read in my
Yeah,
life,
that's
right?
right.
So my goal with my recommendations, who do I think would get the most out of this book? Um, I mean, for one, if you found our description of what the book is about super interesting, then that's something. But I don't think that's uh maybe prescriptive enough. If I were to recommend to people, I'd say someone who currently believes that knowledge, work, or prestige is the most important thing in your life. I think this book could very much help provide a new perspective, I suppose. Uh, I have two more. Or do you wanna comment on that
Oh,
one
I'm
first?
just writing down. It
Oh,
was
okay.
knowledge,
So
prestige, and
or work.
or
No,
just
just
yeah,
work. Someone who
work.
thinks who believes that knowledge, work, or prestige are the most
Yeah,
important things, or is the most important
yeah,
thing in one's life.
yeah. That's right. I
Okay.
suppose that, could I just say there, I think that's a great way of putting it.
Mm.
But could I just say there, I think that taps into the fact that the book uh, takes takes quite not, it's an effortless thing that it does, and that is, it more or less clearly shows that things like knowledge, prestige, and just work, work, work,
Mm-hmm.
without kindness,
Mm-hmm.
empathy,
Yeah.
connection, and an ability to read others and know the impact of things on other people as
Mm.
well as yourself, knowledge, prestige, and work mean nothing
Yeah.
without those other things.
Yeah.
I think the book very capably illustrates that,
Yeah.
which makes it pretty appropriate, I would say, from teenagers up.
Mm-hmm. That's
Whether
fair.
whether your hope that people who have knowledge, prestige, and a lot of work are going to look at that book and see themselves,
Mm.
see into themselves.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer
That's fair.
to that.
That's fair.
Mm.
I think a lot of people who, this could be wrong, but I would guess that a lot of people who truly think that knowledge, work, or prestige is the most important thing in their life also probably wouldn't admit it out loud or even to themselves. Do you know what I mean?
I do. I know exactly what you
Like,
mean.
I think if you ask a CEO, like, what's the most important thing in your life? Like his knee jerk is going to be like, "Oh, my family," right?
Yeah,
But then when he like doesn't show up for his kids, like,
yeah,
recital, and doesn't prioritize like
yeah,
time with his wife,
yeah,
I think his actions represent something other than that, and that's probably
yeah,
the former things that we referenced. So
yeah,
I suppose a difficulty with that recommendation is, you have to be a very self-aware intellectual to come to that conclusion, and also
yeah,
have, and if you are that self-aware, then you're probably already making steps in that direction.
yeah,
So maybe that recommendation should be reworded to be something like less damning on the people that it's targeted at. Does that make sense?
say more about that.
So right now I'm saying someone who thinks that knowledge, work, or prestige is the most important thing
Yeah,
in one's life. If this imaginary CEO or whatever says,
yeah,
"Oh no, that's not me because I care about my family the most,"
yeah,
when their
that's right.
actions don't represent that, then that's not going to help
Yeah,
them get towards this idea. So maybe it has to be restructured into less accusatory language. Um, uh, but I'm not sure. I'll just go on. I'll go into the next one.
yeah,
The second one I wrote was, who should read this book? Someone who sometimes struggles with understanding perspectives of those not similar to themselves.
yes. I mean, it could be an aha moment
Mm,
for people,
yeah.
and in a sort of a way, um, I remember back that far to know that mental health, good mental health, or troubled mental health was such a hard topic. There was so much disapproval
Mm,
and so much, uh, uh, so much ignorance,
mm-hmm,
really, um, that it made life almost hideous for many people who were struggling,
mm,
as this man was. were struggling and damaged by the attitudes of others.
Yeah.
I thought it was powerful the way he was able to be telling the story of considerable baffled. He found things baffling, but
Mm-hmm.
he didn't judge them.
Yeah.
He didn't have the capacity to judge that
Yeah.
this was an act of aggression, or this is being teased, or this is being ridiculed, or
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah. Anyway, I think I got off the subject.
No, that's okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. These yeah, we don't want it to keep it too structured. There's no fun in that.
Mm,
Um so yeah, that's our, and then the third one I wrote was more material than abstract. It was just someone who's interested in unorthodox writing styles, because I just haven't seen a book written like this before. So if you read the first couple chapters, then you'll very quickly see
yeah,
what I mean by that. Well,
yeah,
the first person past perspective that he provides.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, so that's our spoiler free segment.
yes.
Hopefully that has
Okay.
informed your decision as to where it should rank on your, I'm sure if it's anything like mine, insanely uh tome like reading list. Um and now we'll just dive into some specifics and some things we liked, some things we didn't like, and then right at the end we might ascribe a star rating. I'm not sure how useful star ratings are, but they're fun, so we'll do that.
Yeah.
Awesome, sweet. So spoiler zone warning. Okay, we can talk more openly now.
Okay. Uh, are you able to pause this at
Yep,
all?
and we are back with Flowers for Algernon book review. This is the spoiler part of our discussion, and the thing that inspired me to get Mim on this call about this book was last week. You gave me a call and started talking about the work of Oliver Sacks, who I had never heard of before, and if you could just inform the audience who he was and how his how how his moral quandary is eerily reflected in this fiction by Daniel Keyes. That would be awesome.
Um, Oliver Sacks was a wonderful man. I think he's still alive um, because he was a neuroscientist or a neurologist. Um, he wrote books. One book he wrote called Awakenings was made into a film, and it was an amazing film and book about the people who had meningitis or encephalitis. This is way back before they knew anything about stopping these diseases. But he did almost by accident, but also by paying uh, attention to these people who had this sleeping sickness, they called it then. And I think it was back in the 50s or 60s that he got involved with some of these patients who'd been in that state for years and years, having had these brain infections. He believed that if he could give them dopamine, it would free them. They'd then be able to move, they'd be able to speak, they'd be able to interact. And I think the drug that he used was called something like levodopa. And so he administered this drug to these people, and to everybody's amazement, they came back to be able to throw and catch a ball, have a conversation, have memories. Um, it was really miraculous. But then he realized that it was not going to be forever. And that was very distressing to him, particularly, because they had to get submerged again to their old state of sleeping sickness. But in one memorable account, he had administered this treatment to one woman who 30 years prior had suffered from encephalitis, and uh, he got a mirror for her and held it in front of her face, and she was horrified because she only remembered herself as a young person. And that was when he had some really deep and self-searching thoughts about the morality or the being ethical. Was it ethical to have aroused someone, brought them back to life, when all they had memory of was when they actually first got sleeping sickness? So, and he was very moved and almost ashamed at that moment. But of course, there's no ethical thought went through anybody's mind with Professor Niemer. That ethics didn't come into it.
And if there was, that character was fired well before they signed Charlie on.
Well, they were signing on someone who didn't understand what was happening.
Yeah.
And it was just basically without any morality whatever. And even to the point where they say, "Oh, you chose to do this," you know.
Yeah.
It was, but Awakenings is a must read because it actually happened.
Yeah.
And I was immediately reminded of that book when I read about Charlie.
The parallel is uncanny, and the fact that this book was actually written before Awakenings is even stranger.
Yes.
But the events of Awakenings are set before this book was written. So
yeah, that's right. So 1974 was when Oliver Sacks wrote that book.
Yeah.
And 1966, Charlie was written.
Yeah.
I keep calling him Charlie.
So fascinating.
Yes.
My gut reaction to when you were telling me about this idea of, like, is it ethical to give these people who are otherwise in the case of Awakenings, these people who are otherwise do not get to live their life, if you could give them a drug that gives them an extra year of how they existed, without considering the frightening effects of they're already aged. Like, let's say this person suffered from this issue for like a year, and they are going to suffer with it for the rest of their life. So they look nearly identical and they function nearly identical to how they were when they quote unquote went under. My thinking was, if life, a thing that you were born into, you experience and then you cease to exist, if life is worth it, and it's worth existing for the sake of existing, not because you'll get to remember existing, then why shouldn't giving these people one extra year, even if it's only an extra year of what
Yeah.
they would consider life, like
Yeah.
why is that bad? Beside the shocking element. So that was like my gut reaction, but then thinking more about Daniel Keyes's Flowers for Algernon, uh, I mean, I don't think this is necessarily a subject he was trying to tackle, but near the end of the book, Charlie, I mean, even in the middle of the book, Charlie professes like I was still me when I was the original Charlie. Like
Mm.
I've been here the whole time, and you guys act like you created me and that you birthed me, but in reality, they always this Charlie always existed. So I'm not sure the life and death analogy applies quite as much to Charlie's case, but it's an interesting that was just my thought process thinking about that scenario. And so there are some conflicting ideas of whether, like, would you say what Professor Nima did, giving Charlie a glimpse of what a higher intellect of existence looks like, even if he doesn't remember it after he's regressed, fully regressed. Do you think that's a worthwhile experience for Charlie to be given?
It's it is such a tricky
Yeah,
ethical thing, isn't it?
yeah.
I mean, Nima, from memory, at one stage said, "We've got we've got the perfect person. He is wants to be smart, and he's motivated,"
Mm,
which I think's a pretty thin thing to judge.
mm.
Um, how to have a person to do experiments on,
Yeah,
and also the approval for it
yeah,
came from the sister.
yeah,
You know, it was just so loose and.
yeah.
Uh, but yes, back to you. I'm trying to avoid your very tricky question. I'm finding it impossible. I'd have to think about it for a long time.
Mm,
In the case of these people that Oliver Sacks was able to wake up,
mm.
of course, all these years later, there aren't many people left who knew them back then.
Yeah,
It wasn't as though they could be surrounded by all the people they knew and loved then
interesting.
and had memories of. So
So
I just,
it
I haven't revisited that book for so long. I almost shouldn't talk about it,
no, no,
but
no, no, no.
it,
It's
it's, it was very, uh, it was a hugely difficult ethical issue
mm,
for him
yeah.
when he realised that. I don't know if there's only so much of that dopamine that he could administer without
Yeah.
harming them.
And was it that the dopamine was losing its effects, or they were growing a tolerance to it, or
I don't
yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
know.
That's okay.
I haven't.
No worries.
It's going to.
It's. I mean,
I'm going to be looking at it again.
that detail isn't necessarily super crucial, but what you said just then about not having any like loved ones around them, it we could drag the hypothetical out to maybe like 150 years from now, or maybe like 500 years from now. Imagine if you could resurrect someone from the
Yeah.
dead, giving them an extra
Yes.
year of life, only 1 year, and they know
Yeah.
nothing about the world they're born into. Um,
Yeah.
that's like the way you put it, which was sort of like that. If you put it that way, that sounds kind of a little horrific.
Yeah.
So there's probably an
I think.
element. Yeah.
I think the thing was he's a very um, well-connected man who has a great heart. I think he was always appalled at their situation in a home where they were just in wheelchairs day in and day out, and
Yeah.
he did all sorts of things to try and make their lives better,
Mm.
um, just every day, trying to find ways of stimulating them and so on. So this was his motivation. It wasn't, he really cared about those people,
Yeah.
those individuals.
Yeah.
Mm,
Very
yeah,
different to Nima.
yeah, that's right. And he, the, later in the book, he is giving a talk or delivering a paper at a, or I suppose it was at a gathering of professors or something.
This is Flowers for Algernon.
And pardon?
This is Algernon. This is not Awakening, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Algernon. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
So he is very erudite and clever and so on, and but unfortunately Charlie actually steps in
Yeah.
and refers to things
Oh
that this
yeah.
professor's never heard of,
Yeah.
and it's really humiliating for that
Yeah.
professor because his pride and his ego
Yeah.
can't stand it, and here he is being outgunned by
His own
the
quote
person
unquote
he's,
creation.
yes,
By his
the
own terms,
subject.
his own creation.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
The thing about that scene that also blew my mind was it was the perfect A-B of like, okay, this kid now has sorry, this like Charlie now has I just think of Charlie as such a child name. I guess that's probably because
Yes,
of the chocolate factory, but anyway,
yeah,
that's an aside. Um Charlie now has so much intelligence, and so he brings up this not as like a way to attack Nima. He brings it up because he's like, wait, shouldn't Nima know about this? And he brings up this article that which is so awesome. This article that was written in India that was
uh,
published the day prior
yes,
that hadn't been translated yet, so you would have to speak fluent
yeah,
Indian to read it. And he brings
yeah,
this up not as a way to like try and put Nima down. He's literally he just thinks like, shouldn't this guy know this? So even though
yes,
his intelligence has eclipsed Nima's, like to
yeah,
the most hilarious extent, he now
yeah,
he now still doesn't have the emotional understanding to see that what he just did was, and it could easily be interpreted as an attempt of public humiliation, right?
yes, that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's uh, just made so clear
Mm.
quite often that
Mm.
look, if you go back to one of the main themes, I think, which that theme of human isolation, it is a it is tragic that he remains isolated and unsure of himself and so
Mm.
on, even though
The whole way
he's
through.
the bright as bright as bright,
Yeah.
and it's uh, just this the business of the emotional development um, and understanding nuance and
Yeah.
all the things that need to go to make good connections.
Yeah. And on the isolation thing, so he's isolated when he's at the start of the experiment because he doesn't understand intellectually stuff, and then he's isolated at the peak of the experiment because he's
Yes,
so intelligent and he doesn't understand
yeah,
emotional things. And he's even isolated when he's exactly the same intelligence as the other people from Alice, who says, I like want to spend time with you, but I'm worried about the changes that you're going to go through. By the end of 2 weeks, you'll be a completely different person. So the one glimpse at living a human life that he has, he
yeah,
like the only person that he trusts
yes,
isolates him again, which is just
yeah. it's tragic.
Yeah. It's,
I think the thing is that people reacted to him badly because they were thinking he was playing a mental superiority card
yeah. Yeah.
when he's actually just wants the truth and the knowledge.
Yep.
That's important to him, but
Yep.
the delivery of it and how, well, his workers
Mm.
despised him
Mm.
because he knew more, and he had to leave his job, which he desperately wanted to keep,
Yeah.
because of these offended people who thought he was scoring off them somehow
Mm.
because he was so bright. And they weren't. They
Yeah.
didn't feel bright at all.
Yeah. No, that's yeah, it was very yeah, some of those scenes were pretty heartbreaking.
Yeah,
Um
that's, you could weep.
yeah, there was a lot of sadness and isolation. Um was there were there any things that I suppose you were less of a fan of? Were there any ways he tackled certain things? Because look, I'll say my one, and maybe it'll spark
Yeah,
some ideas. And it was just in the scene where he gets drunk at the party. It
yeah.
feels like Charlie yells out the themes of the book at Professor Nema, which I just found like it was it came across as very on the nose to me. And for a book about, someone being super smart, I feel like outlining, like he said stuff like, um, oh, I look, I don't have specific excerpts, but what I remember feeling like I was being explained the themes of the book, like by
Oh,
the protagonist, which in my mind
oh,
felt kind of strange. Um,
yeah. Look, I know what you mean. I can't remember feeling that,
mhm.
but I have had times I've been offended
Yeah.
by the author not giving me the space to
Mm,
work it out.
yeah.
Is that what you felt?
That's sort of what I felt in that
So,
scene. Yeah.
yeah, that it just wasn't needed,
Mm,
because I think the subtlety of his messages
yeah.
uh, uh, is something to behold in
Yeah.
this book.
Yeah. I
But I can't, for me, that whatever it was didn't
Yep. That
affect me like that.
that's fair. That's awesome. Yeah, that's cool.
Mm.
Do you have any other any nitpicks?
I think the constant thread of wanting and needing to belong
Mm-hmm.
was very poignant
Mm.
when you think of what happened in his own family
Yeah.
um, of origin,
Yeah.
and the fact that the mother's denial
Mm.
really
Yeah, that.
absolutely ruined uh, any sort of. She was not emotionally dependable
Yeah.
because she had the outbursts and the all that. And when the sister became an adolescent,
Mm-hmm.
that was when there was all the worry
Mm.
about his sexual, understandable sexual community. Just it, it was just curiosity, really.
Yeah.
He hadn't had any sort of information. He was trying to work things out. Why this and why that,
Yeah.
and he was denied that as well. And so a lot of his
I mean, his
life,
he was just his actions were just read as sexual when they weren't whatsoever by his
yes, they
mother.
were curiosity,
Um, and
and
he just didn't understand. He didn't even understand what she meant, which was especially distressing for him because he was just so confused.
yes,
Um,
he was in such a state with those two women,
mm,
uh, where I think early on his sister did look after him
mm,
somewhat,
mm.
but
But then since the dog thing, then she started blaming him for just about
Yeah.
all of her problems.
Yes. So, and then of course the mother, it couldn't be sorted out with the mother because she was already on the road to dementia when
Yeah.
they came back together again.
Yeah, their sine
So
waves of mental functioning didn't line up whatsoever.
mm, that's right. Oh yeah, there are a lot of heartbreaks in that book,
Yeah, yeah,
and a bit of you do get sort of a, you want to fix things
yeah,
like no, and also with him I found myself saying no Charlie, no,
yeah,
don't do it that way,
yeah,
don't, that's going to hurt you,
yeah,
because his he he wasn't, he was so vulnerable
mm,
really,
mm,
and it's wanting to keep him safe, that was my response.
mm. And especially
Mm,
on the downwards slope, the just the inevitability of it. Once it finally sets in with you, that you realize this is
yeah,
what's gonna happen.
yeah,
The denial of the certain, and then it becomes apparent, is a depressing feeling. And I mean, it
yes,
I think it touches on the whole existential dread thing, because of the
yes,
nature of his existence in two forms, basically. um
yes.
so so yeah, I found that part to be especially heartbreaking. Was there a scene that you were closest to tearing up for? Do you remember that level of specificity?
I I don't, but it was usually when he was misconstruing
Mm,
the malice or the um,
mm,
unpleasantness
mm,
of the way he was ridiculed. That
mm.
was that was really
A special kind of heartbreaking.
distressing.
Yeah,
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 I, I think, and of course he would describe it in his journal as, so he kept trying to reassure himself. I often thought at a level that he was continually saying, "These are my friends,"
yeah,
like as if he reassured himself enough, they would be his friends.
yeah.
But I think at a level he might have realized that they weren't. But then he didn't know what
Mm.
friendship was or connection.
So you said at a level he might have
Yes,
known
I,
that
I
they weren't
wondered
his
if
friends.
he,
Do you think there's a smart Charlie inside the less intelligent Charlie deep down,
yeah,
that's trapped the same way that the original Charlie was in the middle of the book?
oh, that's such an interesting question. I, I think that's quite possible, and that's why he protested so much that they were his friends.
Mm,
When, to our interpretation, they were being quite cruel
yeah,
and and uh, mean
yeah,
and horrible,
yeah,
really. But under the guise of ha ha, we're all laughing here together,
yeah,
and him not understanding, to someone saying, "Oh, you're not doing a Charlie, are you?"
yeah,
to one of the colleagues,
yeah,
that sort of thing. Yeah,
yeah,
I'm afraid all that was mm, that was difficult to
yeah. It's
read.
because it's difficult enough if there's just, like, standard bullying, and then the character feels bad about it. But when the character is,
Yeah,
like, actively trying to resist the idea that they're being bullied,
yeah,
it definitely makes it harder.
yeah. It yes, it's like a bigger crime, actually,
Mm,
isn't it?
yeah. There's I remember Bryan Cranston talking about acting, and he was talking about how and this is what made me think of that the whole you talking about the saddest moment was when he was like not in on it, where he didn't get it, or where he was like
Yeah,
resisting the idea of them
yeah.
being making fun of him. Bryan Cranston said something like, with a sad scene, with a sad um character, it's it's
Yeah.
not it's not it's not so much sad if they're just letting themselves be sad. It's so much worse if they're trying to stop themselves from crying. Like, that has so much more
Oh,
of an
yes.
impact on the audience. Somebody crying is
Yeah.
like, they're just expressing their emotions, but then somebody trying to
Yeah.
stop themselves from crying
And
is
be
just
brave.
is just a is a hits you deeper, I guess.
That
Um,
that's a, yeah, that's very interesting.
hmm. um, but yeah, it's I mean, it's a fascinating book. It's a very,
Yeah.
very fascinating concept. Being able to put yourself in like, he captures the different levels of intelligence with such, because it's difficult being, the average 90% of standard middle intelligence to put
Mm,
yourself in the mind of somebody who is that much more or that much less.
mm,
And it might be accurate, it might be not, but what it felt like is it felt real, and it
mm,
felt accurate, which is, I mean, that's all that matters when it comes to books, right?
mm.
And so, like, generally with plots and characters, when you're put into somebody's head, you're operating similar organic machinery than they are. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
generally speaking, outside of the world of, I guess, fantasy and some sci-fi, if you're reading a real world book set in the real world, you're probably of similar mental build to that person. But in this book, you get put into these two people who are both on each end of the spectrum in a way that, like, is difficult to imagine what having that machinery would even feel like, or what even your thought process would be like. So I thought he did that in such a fascinating way.
Absolutely.
Mm,
Just a word about the technique
mm,
of telling. It's interesting that that journal, uh, instead of the author narrating the events, if you're reading a journal, you're actually there on the day.
mm,
It's a it's a it's a trick almost,
yeah.
or just a skill really, so that you read, you are stepping through it
Mm,
with the person who's writing the journal,
yeah.
whereas um, a narrator would say this happened and that happened
Yep.
next, and um, then then they might expand into uh, bringing characters in to have discussions or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But then it, I just thought I was toiling,
Mm,
toiling really
mm,
through the process
mm,
that he'd been put through.
yeah.
And the diary writing did that. It wasn't too long. It wouldn't put anybody to sleep. But
Mm-hmm.
I thought that technique was wonderful.
I totally agree. I have a question about that technique. Do you, if you think of another non-fiction similar setting book that you've read recently, or maybe not recently, just at all, um, why
Recently,
recently?
I've read one.
Okay,
Mm.
why wouldn't you, as an author, put tell a story through a journal? Because presumably this other book you read didn't. Because this book through the journal is an incredible incredible format, and it serves the book well. And that raises the question, why does that serve it well? And an easier question to ask is, why doesn't it serve other novels well?
I'll tell you. I think it's about the tense you're in.
Mm-hmm.
If it's present tense or past tense, I think the present tense is somehow achieved by the journal. I don't know. That
Interesting.
mightn't be right at all. But
Yep, carry on.
someone who's related to you wrote a book
Mm-hmm.
and had the editor say, don't do that after the event account every chapter or three,
Mm-hmm.
that there's an account of events. Get it into the present tense,
Interesting.
and that sometimes means shorter chapters.
Mm-hmm.
In this book's case, it's short journal
Mm.
entries.
Mm.
It is a bit something like that,
Yeah, interesting.
and somehow that for me that forces me to read on. I
Yeah,
don't know what
interesting.
that is.
So with that book that you were referring to just
Yes.
then, that one's not written in a journal, but
No,
you
it's
say
not.
you say Algernon is served well because it makes it feel like a journal.
Yeah,
Sorry, feels like present tense. The journal does.
yeah, yeah.
Why that book that you're referring to? Why would you not do it in a journal format? Even if there are different characters, you could do different journal entries from different people. They're all writing in their own individual journals.
I
Why
think
wouldn't you?
this. I think this author had to substantiate the need for a journal, which he cleverly did,
Mm-hmm.
because this Charlie had to keep a journal
Yeah.
more or less.
Yeah.
It was interesting because he often says, "I'd have to write this journal, but there's nothing to tell."
Yeah.
When he had the pressure
Yeah.
from the scientists to do it,
Yeah.
it was hard for him.
Yeah.
But tell he did anyway.
Yeah.
I think it's quite clever. I probably wouldn't have been so gripped by it if it wasn't in that
Mm.
strange setting
Mm.
um,
Like if it was
where
just a
he
regular narrator.
where he was expected to write a journal, but this delightful way. I mean, he's struggling with his spelling and
Yeah.
wanting to get it down on paper,
Yeah.
or having to in the case of the
Yeah.
experiment.
And sometimes he's like fixing his spelling. So
Yeah, I
it
know.
gives you like
And
as he's getting smarter.
and it, but also it tells you about him.
Mm.
It tells a lot about him and a lot about other people without him being dismissive, unpleasant. Uh, he just tells,
Mm.
and you know darn well that these people shouldn't be doing or saying what they should be doing, should what they do,
Mm-hmm.
without him being judgmental or saying so and so was mean to me or anything like that.
Mm.
He, judgment is pretty much he can get baffled and dislocated by it, but he's not judgmental.
Mm.
So it gets written down, and I think that's the skill of an author, to leave some space
Mm.
for the reader,
Mm.
because I felt plenty of space to make my own judgments, look through my own lens as well.
Mm.
Some authors want you just to get on board and they do all the talking, as it
Mm.
were,
Mm.
and interpreting.
Mm-hmm.
I thought this was clever
Mm-hmm.
because he left it to us
Mm.
so often to have an opinion about this person or that person.
Mm. Yeah. I I agree. And I
What
think,
kept you
sorry,
what kept you reading it?
what kept me reading it?
Did you pick it up and then not want to put it down, or
It
what?
wasn't it wasn't actually super immediate. I excuse me. I remember reading it, and I at the start I started to get a little bit tired of the like bad spelling because I would read it so slowly because I was trying to it's like
Yes.
so hard to get through. And so I was at first I was actually motivated just to see what the smart part of Charlie looked like because
Oh,
I had
really?
seen what the starting Charlie was, and so
Yeah.
I was intrigued as to like if you can make
Yeah.
this writing feel that different to a regular person's journal entry, I'm really curious to see where it goes. And then once we got there,
Yeah.
I was really fascinated by
Yeah.
what such an intellectually superior person's inner dialogue sounded like, but who is
Yeah.
also emotionally completely stunted. I found that fascinating.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then the final third was basically just reading on out of uh how would I put it? Out of like morbid depression. Like how you can't avert
Yes.
your like you always look at roadkill on the side of the road when you pass it or whatever. Like I was just like at the point where you know what's gonna happen. Oh,
Yeah.
then I was just reading on like, oh no, this poor guy. I feel so bad for
Yeah.
him, but I can't put it down now. Like even though I know what the ending of the book is gonna be, like I just can't, like I can't. It doesn't feel fair to just
No.
press pause.
So
I have to
you
sit
had
through.
actually bonded with him, had you?
Yeah, yeah. Well, not bonded, but I had grown. I mean, I think
You
everyone who reads the
cared.
book grows a great deal of empathy for this guy. Like
Yes.
he's been the um through the Colosseum on all fronts.
Y- yes.
And
Yeah.
yeah, the yeah, it's tough. Do you think the experiment overall enriched his life more than it didn't? Because he was already being made fun
Uh,
of when he was at the
y-
start.
yes, he was. Uh, Look, I think more importantly, it answered a lot of questions for him
Mm,
in the about his life, and
yeah,
somehow uh, it gave him the capacity to make a bit more sense, I think, of
yeah,
what a hard upbringing and so on. It's a really hard question to answer.
yeah.
Um, it depends on your definition of enrichment too,
Mm-hmm.
because riches vary from person to
Yeah, that's true.
person,
That's true.
and just him realizing some of the some of the understanding the fights that the parents had had over
Yeah.
his treatment, and understanding some of that probably was worth having.
Mm. And
But
yeah, that I mean, I d- it's the question of is ignorance bliss, right? In a little bit.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
like it would
but
have been potentially easier for him to never have gone through the treatment and have always just not understood why his parents fight, not understood why people laughed while they were around him, and
mm, I
Yeah.
think the author made it pretty clear that he was a very, very vulnerable person,
Mm.
and that vulnerability could have increased greatly. I just thought the uh, it was made very clear that a man in a man's body with the mental age of I think it'd be a 7-year-old,
Mm.
wouldn't it?
I'm not sure what developmental
Or
tracks are, and it's difficult to know what goes inside the mind of a 7-year-old because if they tell you, you can't really. It's difficult to pass that information. So
yeah.
but I
So
think there are like I think kids understand lying at a younger age. I think they understand.
yeah.
Um, I'm not sure at what age they understand empathy. Uh,
Um, well,
but
if it's modelled for them, they understand it, but
yeah,
can't put the words around it.
yeah.
So,
It's
but I thought there was enough nastiness in some of the taking advantage of his vulnerability. For example, filling him up with alcohol and
yeah.
um, just
Wait, they do that while before the surgery?
no, that was at a
That was at the.
that was oh yes, it was before.
It was
But
before
the
the
thing
surgery.
is, I had a terribly uneasy feeling that
Oh
something
yes, sorry.
he
The
was
this was in like late high school or something where
yeah
they.
when he didn't know
Yep. I
about
remember now.
about things, but I think the author has introduced quite a sharp edge on this vulnerability thing, and I had a bit of a dread that something really awful could happen to
Mm,
him, um, either psychologically or physically, because of his incredible vulnerability.
yeah.
So you don't know, you don't know really if when he did revert to being the age he started out as, if he had a memory
It seemed like he
of
didn't have a memory of
yeah
much of
of
the smart
the
Charlie Gordon.
no, or if he had retained explanations or
Yeah.
whatever.
But maybe
Um,
maybe his remember the idea of the fact that there might be a smart Charlie Gordon in him questioning whether those are really his friends. That idea we
yeah.
discussed earlier. Maybe that Gordon was actually satiated, and at a subconscious level,
Oh,
Charlie
I
now
s-
can live in peace at the the ranch that he goes to or whatever, and with maybe some familial trauma understood, with some
yeah,
trauma understood, and like even if he can't articulate it himself, much like you said a 7-year old can't or a young child can't,
yeah,
maybe even if he can't
yeah.
articulate himself, maybe he is actually better off after making those amends.
That's a really interesting thought
Mm,
because, in a way, he was coming home to who he was,
yeah,
who he thought he was. It, which would hopefully be more comfortable than him having to progress for that length of time
mm,
through the dangerous world that could be very, very damaging. And now he was safe. I had a feeling that he was safe, even though possibly he was going to die.
yeah, well,
But I had a feeling that of slight relief
mm,
that for this, however long it would be, that he would be safe. It's odd, isn't it?
yeah,
Mm.
yeah, well, very I mean, that was already a lot to discuss, and we can wrap it soon if you want. Um,
Yeah, I've loved hearing your
Thank you. I've really loved
res-
hearing your insights.
reaction to the book.
Yeah, it's been really fun, and um, I mean, somebody with just a, a couple more years under my belt, it's fascinating seeing the difference in our perspectives on it, and also I've loved the sources you've pulled in with Oliver Sacks and all that.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
that was really the catalyst that makes me think yeah, this I'd love to have this conversation in full, and I really do enjoy I really did enjoy this talk.
Oh, so did I.
Awesome.
It's wonderful.
We'll
Okay.
wait before we say bye. We'll do everyone wants stars out of 10, and so
Oh, for the book.
I'll pass it over to you for your final evaluation.
I find stars not
Mm.
expressive enough.
Yeah, I mean, that's why like
uh,
I tried with the recommendation section, um, make it a bit
yes.
more specific because there are fictions that I would rate higher stars than this one that I would recommend to probably less people just because I don't think they would like them as much. So, but
I think for me, um, and at this age and stage of my life, which is advanced,
mm-hmm.
um, I would give it, I would probably give it 4 or 5.
4 or 5.
At, it was, it was, uh, it's very a broad sword where you
Mm,
need a rapier
yeah.
to be more specific.
You can do out of 10 if you want, and you can do point fives.
um, it'd be close. It'd be 8 or 9.
8 or 9. Nice.
Yes,
Awesome.
it affected me
Mm,
greatly.
yeah, that's that's really cool. Um,
Mm. What about you?
I've been. I think I'll stick with my initial number. I put here 7.5.
Yep,
I thought it was really good, and
yep,
I've only started reading fiction this year, so I don't have a wide breadth
yeah.
of stuff to go off of. Um,
Mm.
and of the four major fictions I've read this year, this is technically the lowest rated, but I
Yep.
also think it's the one I would recommend the most to people
Mm. That's interesting.
because I think it's really
Yeah.
good and I think it's much more accessible. And I also think it covers some really fascinating topics and is really unique. And I also take into account page count if I were to recommend people. So like for I think Crime and Punishment
Oh,
was so good,
yep.
but I also am aware that it's like almost 3 or 4 times longer than the average book that people read. So like that means it's basically 3 or 4 times harder for people to actually read or make that decision. And like
Yeah.
similar thing with June. Like I think I preferred June to this book, but I also think that nowhere near as many people are as massive sci-fi nerds as I would be, right? So
Yeah.
like June covered some awesome subjects, but if you just are not interested whatsoever in sci-fi, you just likely won't enjoy it. So I gave it a 7.5, but that's also why I wanted to talk about who I'd actually recommend it to more than the number
Yeah.
arbitrary fake imaginary number where we're comparing things that are very difficult, very difficult to compare. Um, so I agree with your sentiment that um, star ratings out of 10 only go so far.
Yeah. Oh, look, I'm very glad to have had this
Yeah, likewise.
post-mortem of the
Likewise.
book.
I love talking about uh important pieces of work that I consume. I feel like there are so many movies and TV shows and games and books
Yeah,
especially that I just play, and then even if I meet somebody who has also interacted with that media, I was like, "Oh,
yeah.
did you read that?" They were like, "Yeah, it was good." I was like, "Yeah, it was good." And then that's the end of that
It's
conversation,
it,
which
but
I
it's
think's a
all
shame.
about connection, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah. Yeah. So I'm
All
really
right.
really happy. Well, I'll have to fill you in on what the next book or two we'll be reading is, and if you want to join
Yes,
in,
you will.
I think
Yeah,
you'd make an excellent addition to Max and my team.
I'm very pleased to have been invited.
Awesome. Well,
All
you
right.
heard it there first, folks. New regular every month attendee of the podcast, of the Bed Hair Studio podcast. No, nothing locked in, but I'll float the titles by you, and if you're interested in joining in on one, we'll be doing monthly ones for as long as we can, I suppose, or as long as we want to. Anyway, that was Ari and Mim signing off. Hope you guys have a lovely rest of your day, and you as well, Mim. Hope the weather's fair in Canberra.
Thank you.
Sweet.
Bye now.
See ya. Bye.